Imagine opening a chamber that no one has entered for almost 4,000 years. Not a royal treasure room filled with gold, not the burial chamber of a famous pharaoh, and not one of those dramatic discoveries invented for a movie. Instead, your light falls on dozens of tiny wooden people. Some of them are carrying grain, some are baking bread, others are making beer, slaughtering cattle, writing accounts, rowing boats, or bringing offerings. It looks almost like an ancient dollhouse. But these were not toys, and the man who found them, Egyptologist Herbert Winlock, described that first glimpse as one of the most astonishing moments an excavator could ever experience. So whose tomb was this? Why did the main parts of it appear to have been completely robbed? How did a small hidden chamber survive? And how could objects made mainly from wood, plaster, paint, and linen still look so vivid after roughly 4,000 years? To understand the discovery, we first need to meet the man for whom all of this was made. His name was Meketre. Meketre was not a pharaoh, but he was far from an ordinary person. He was a powerful royal official who lived during one of the most important political transitions in ancient Egyptian history, the movement from the 11th dynasty into the early 12th dynasty, at the beginning of what Egyptologists call the Middle Kingdom. The Metropolitan Museum of Art identifies him as a royal chief steward. That title matters. A chief steward was involved in the management of royal resources, estates, supplies, labor, and institutional wealth. Meketre's tomb is now known as TT 280, or Theban Tomb 280. It was cut into the rock in the southern Asasif area of western Thebes, across the Nile from the ancient city, and close to the great funerary landscape of Deir el-Bahri. The objects from the hidden chamber are generally dated to the early reign of Amenemhat I, approximately 1981 to 1975 BC. That means these models are around 4,000 years old, and this is where the story becomes especially strange. When modern archaeologists worked at Meketre's tomb, they were not entering a perfectly sealed monument filled with untouched treasures. Quite the opposite. The accessible rooms had already been robbed and plundered in antiquity. Whatever valuables could easily be found had apparently been disturbed or removed long before modern excavation began. So from an archaeologist's point of view, this did not look like the beginning of a spectacular treasure story. There was another important detail. Herbert Winlock was not clearing the tomb because he expected to discover an untouched collection of miniature figures. Early in 1920, he wanted an accurate floor plan of the tomb for his study and a map of the 11th dynasty necropolis at Thebes. To record the structure properly, his workers had to remove debris that had accumulated inside the tomb. That distinction is important. You will sometimes hear people say, Herbert Winlock discovered the tomb of Meketre. That wording is misleading. The tomb itself was already known. What Winlock and the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Egypt expedition discovered during the cleanup was a small hidden enclosure connected to a corridor leading to the stone tomb. In Egyptology publications, this chamber is often called a crypt. In this particular context, the word refers to the secluded chamber where the models and statues were placed. It should not be automatically thought of as a giant secret chamber filled with royal treasures. It was small, but what was in it was extraordinary. I must say that the images in our videos are all staged and staged. To see real images from all over art history, you can refer to reliable sites and sources, friends. Our images are only to help you visualize the events that took place, okay? So, As the workers cleared away the piled-up rubble, they found an irregular opening in the rock. At first, there didn't seem to be much to see. The opening was too small to pass through, so Winlock and the others had to reach down to the ground and shine a light through the gap. Winlock later described this moment in his journal about the tomb. According to him, they had found a small, perfectly intact hall. This brief quote is important because it comes from Winlock's own account, not from a fashion model. The Metropolitan Museum describes the chamber as having remained untouched for roughly 4,000 years and says it contained 24 models in an exceptionally well-preserved condition. Now, we need to be careful with the word untouched. It does not mean that every single object was magically perfect or that nothing had cracked, loosened, collapsed, or deteriorated over time. It means that the chamber itself had not been entered and plundered in the way the accessible parts of the tomb had been. The arrangement the excavators encountered was therefore extremely valuable. They were not looking at objects purchased from the antiquities market with no archaeological context. They were looking at a funerary group still connected to the chamber in which ancient Egyptians had deposited it. And there were 24 models, not 24 individual people, 24 separate model groups, many containing multiple human figures, animals, tools, buildings, boats, food production scenes, and other objects. What was actually inside? The collection represented several different parts of the world that Meketre's funerary equipment was designed to recreate. There were boats used for travel and ceremonial purposes. There were offering bearers carrying goods. There was a garden with a rectangular pool and a columned porch. There was a cattle stable. There was a slaughterhouse. There was a combined bakery and brewery. And there was the remarkable model that often makes modern viewers stop and ask, "Is this really ancient?" The model of a granary with scribes. It is an authentic Middle Kingdom funerary model, excavated from Meketre's hidden chamber in 1920. The Metropolitan Museum dates it to approximately 1981 to 1975 BC and records its materials as wood, plaster, paint, linen, and actual grain. The model is also much larger than it may appear in photographs. It is almost 75 centimeters long, about 56 centimeters wide, and more than 36 centimeters high. The average human figure is around 20 centimeters tall. Inside, the structure is divided into two main zones. One area is the granary itself, where grain was stored. The other is an administrative and accounting area. 6 men carry sacks of grain, but they are outnumbered by the men responsible for measuring, supervising, and recording it. 4 scribes are shown working. 2 write on papyrus scrolls, while 2 use wooden writing boards. That is not a random decorative detail. Grain was one of the foundations of the Egyptian economy, but the granary is only one part of the miniature world. Nearby was the combined bakery and brewery model. In that scene, workers crush and grind grain, prepare dough, bake bread, and take part in the production of beer. The Metropolitan Museum points out an almost unbelievable detail. The hands of some workers handling the dough were painted white, apparently representing flour dust. These artists were not simply carving generic human shapes. They were observing gestures, tools, work stages, materials, and bodily movement. The slaughterhouse model is just as detailed. And that is something we have to keep in mind throughout this story. The objects are real. Their excavation context is real. Their approximate date is well established. But not every question about what each figure represented has one completely certain answer. Were they just miniature scenes of daily life? For many years, these objects were commonly described as models of daily life. That description is not entirely wrong. They do show activities that took place in ancient Egyptian society: grain storage, accounting, food production, animal management, transportation, offerings, and river travel. But calling them simple pictures of everyday life can miss their funerary purpose. They were placed inside a tomb. They formed part of Meketre's funerary equipment. According to the Metropolitan Museum's interpretation, they were intended to help provide the sustenance and ritual services required for his existence after death. So the bakery was not placed there only to show us how Egyptians made bread. The granary was not made as a school project for future archaeologists. The boats were not decorative toys. These models belonged to a system of Egyptian funerary belief in which images, objects, offerings, texts, and rituals could help ensure that the dead continued to receive food, movement, service, and protection. Now here's the question almost everyone asks when they see these models. Wait, they're made of wood, linen, plaster, paint, and even real grain. So how are they still here after 4,000 years? But those organisms need water to survive, and that's where Egypt is different. Meketre's models spent nearly 4,000 years inside a sealed rock-cut tomb in Upper Egypt, one of the driest environments on Earth. There was almost no rain, very little moisture, no sunlight, and for most of those centuries, almost no human disturbance. That doesn't mean the objects stayed exactly as they were on the day they were buried. If you look closely, many figures have cracks. Some pieces broke. Some paint flaked away. A few parts became detached over time. So no, they didn't survive because ancient Egyptian wood was somehow magical. They survived because they were buried in an environment that dramatically slowed the natural processes of decay. But there's another reason they still look so impressive today: conservation. People sometimes think museums completely rebuild ancient objects. That's usually not what happens. Professional conservators try to preserve as much original material as possible. They carefully clean the surface, stabilize fragile wood, secure loose paint, and when broken pieces can safely be reattached, they use modern conservation materials designed to be reversible whenever possible. That's called conservation, not reconstruction. A good example comes from one of Meketre's slaughterhouse models. The Metropolitan Museum specifically notes that the cords holding the hanging cuts of meat are modern restorations. In other words, the museum openly tells visitors which parts are ancient and which parts have been restored. That's exactly how modern conservation is supposed to work. So when you see the granary, the bakery, or the famous boats today, you're looking mostly at genuine 4,000-year-old objects that have been carefully stabilized, not modern replicas pretending to be ancient. So where are the models today? Most people assume they're all in one museum. They're not. When the Metropolitan Museum excavated Meketre's hidden chamber in 1920, Egypt's Antiquities Service followed a system called partage. At the time, this was the normal legal practice in Egypt. After excavation, many finds were officially divided between Egypt and the foreign institution that had carried out the excavation. That's exactly what happened here. Part of Meketre's collection remained in Egypt. Another part went to New York. Today, the collection is mainly divided between the Egyptian Museum in Cairo and the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Some objects are now also housed in the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization in Cairo, following museum reorganizations. That means no museum owns the entire hidden chamber. If you want to see everything that survived, you actually have to visit more than one museum. And honestly, that's kind of fitting. For almost 4,000 years, these models stayed together inside one hidden room. Today, they're separated by thousands of miles, but together, they still tell one of the most extraordinary archaeological stories ever uncovered. We read through trusted books, academic research, and reliable sources for every single episode because we want to share accurate information, not just interesting stories. If you enjoyed this video, we'd love your support. Please leave a like, subscribe to Art.Timeline, and come explore the history of art with us.